Nolan Reed had never been late a day in his life. That Tuesday morning, he arrived at Redmond and Pierce Financial at 7:52 a.m., same as always. The sun was just beginning to reflect off the city's high-rises, and the building's glass facade caught the light like a polished blade. Inside, everything was still waking up, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the gentle click of keyboards from early risers, and the murmur of elevators opening on every floor. He paused for a moment outside his office. 9 years. That brass plate bearing his name had weathered 2 rebrands, for CEOs, and more quarterly reports than he could count. Inside, framed certificates lined the wall, alongside a photo of him with his daughter at a charity gala sponsored by the firm. Everything about the space reflected a career built on trust, late nights, and results. By 9:18, none of it mattered. "Close the door, Nolan," said Tyler Grayson, the firm's newly installed VP of Sales. He was 36, clean-shaven, and dressed like he had just stepped out of a magazine. The office he sat in still smelled faintly of new leather and recent paint, temporary power disguised as permanence. A leather folder sat on the table between them, embossed with the firm's logo, but its contents were unmistakable. It was labeled Transition Planning. Not Performance Review. Not Team Realignment. Just Transition. A polite word for exit. "I appreciate everything you've done here," Tyler began, his tone rehearsed and without warmth. "But the firm is moving in a new direction. We're realigning senior leadership to better match the profile Crestview Holdings expects for long-term scalability." Crestview Holdings, the private equity firm sniffing around for the past 6 months. The rumors were true, then. Nolan had seen the shift in tone at board meetings, the strategic rephrasing of long-term versus legacy, the smiling consultants who kept appearing in corners with clipboards. He had hoped he was wrong. "I assume this is effective immediately," Nolan said, voice even. Tyler nodded. "Of course, your severance package is generous. We'll assist with transitions. Your clients will be redistributed to the associates we've been grooming." Nolan felt a small flicker in his chest, not rage, not panic. Something deeper. Resignation. He'd known for months that his value wasn't being measured anymore. The firm had moved from relationships to ratios. The young stars they favored didn't know his clients by name. They knew them as tier brackets, margins, portfolios. It wasn't personal anymore. 20 minutes later, he walked out of the office with a white envelope, a cardboard box containing a few books, a bonsai he'd been nurturing for 6 years, and silence in his wake. No one said goodbye. A few glanced up, then quickly away. He paused in the elevator, staring at his reflection in the polished doors. Gray at the temples. Lines at the eyes. But steady. Unapologetic. By noon, his access badge was revoked. His email credentials disabled. His name vanished from the company roster. What Redmond and Pierce failed to understand was this. Nolan never worked for the firm. He worked for the people who called when their businesses hit turbulence. The ones who thanked him not with bonuses, but with trust. The ones who stayed through crises because he answered the phone after hours. The ones who didn't ask for quarterly projections, they asked for Nolan. And those people? They didn't sign on for a logo. They signed on for him. Nolan didn't go home that evening. The idea of stepping into his apartment, sterile, quiet, and now void of meaning, felt heavier than the day itself. Instead, he drove. He drove with no destination, through the city's north end, past blinking traffic lights and rows of shuttered businesses. The roads blurred into the same gray haze that had filled his chest since 9:18 that morning. Eventually, almost without thinking, He pulled into the parking lot of an old diner he used to haunt during his early career days, the kind of place that served pancakes at all hours and didn't judge a man in a suit who ordered nothing but coffee. He slid into a booth by the window and placed his phone on the table. For a long moment, he just sat, watching the rain slick down the glass, listening to the low murmur of conversations around him, the occasional clink of silverware against ceramic. His waitress, middle-aged, kind eyes, name tag that read Judy, poured him a black coffee without asking. "Rough day?" she asked gently. "You could say that." She gave a knowing nod and left him alone. Nolan opened the leather notebook he always kept in his coat pocket. He flipped to a clean page and wrote 3 names. Joel Callahan, Camille Reyes, Oliver Wynn. Clients. But more than that, people who had trusted him when trust wasn't easy. They'd stuck through rough patches, market dips, unexpected regulation changes. Because he hadn't just managed their portfolios, he'd answered their late-night calls. Spoken plainly. Advised them like family. He took a sip of coffee, steeled his breath, and dialed the first number. "Joel? Reed?" Joel's voice cracked through the speaker, gravelly and unmistakable. "Tell me they didn't do it." "They did." Silence. "Hell," Joel muttered. "You kept us stable through 3 different CFOs and a regulatory audit that damn near closed us. What are they thinking?" "They're thinking scalability." "Well, I'm thinking loyalty. You call me when you land somewhere. We'll move everything." The second call was to Camille. She answered on the first ring. "I've been waiting for this call," she said, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "Redmond's been posturing for weeks. I read the signs. They made it official. I'm not surprised. But I am disappointed. Let me know your next move." "Will do." And then, Oliver. Unlike the others, Oliver paused. "Are you okay?" he asked, simply. It was the first time all day anyone had asked him that. "I will be," Nolan replied. "Well then," Oliver said, "you take your time. But when you're ready, I've got work for you. The kind of work where people still matter." By the time Nolan left the diner, his notebook now holding 6 names, not 3, the ache in his chest had dulled. He hadn't made an announcement. He hadn't gone public. But the word would spread. Quietly. Efficiently. Because the clients knew. And they weren't following a brand. They were following a man. 2 days later, Nolan received an unexpected message. It came in the form of a short email, subject line, "Let's catch up." The sender was Daniel Harper, a name Nolan hadn't heard in years. Daniel had once been a junior analyst at Redmond and Pierce, a quiet, perceptive kid with more humility than ego. Back then, Nolan had taken him under his wing, mentoring him when no one else would. Now he was managing partner at Halston Rowe Partners, a boutique investment firm that had made quiet but steady waves in the mid-market advisory world. Known for its bespoke approach and strong client retention, Halston Rowe had never aimed to be the biggest. But they were becoming one of the most respected. Nolan replied simply, "Name the time and place." They met at a sunlit cafe in the Riverfront district, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. Daniel arrived early, looking sharp but unpretentious, gray blazer, rolled sleeves, a worn leather notebook under his arm. "Good to see you again," he said, shaking Nolan's hand with genuine warmth. "Though I wish it were under different circumstances." "I appreciate you reaching out," Nolan replied. "Didn't think I'd be back in play this soon." Daniel smiled. "You never really left the field. Your clients made sure of that." They talked for an hour. About the industry. About burnout. About the vacuum of trust that was swallowing up firms chasing valuation over value. Nolan spoke candidly. Daniel listened intently. Then, near the end of their second cup of coffee, Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside, a proposal. Senior partner, head of strategic relationships. Autonomy. Equity. A mandate to build his own team, his way. We don't need a salesman, Daniel said. We need a builder. Someone clients already trust. Someone who sees around corners. Nolan studied the offer. It was more than generous. But it wasn't the compensation that convinced him. It was the philosophy. People still matter here, don't they? Daniel nodded. They're all that matter. Nolan closed the folder and set it aside. All right, he said. Let's build something worth staying for. Nolan's first day at Halston Row felt less like onboarding and more like returning to a place he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The firm occupied 2 open concept floors of a converted garment warehouse, a far cry from Redmond and Pierce's polished glass offices. But it pulsed with something rare in finance: humility. No pretentious titles on doors. No corner offices. Just teams in constant conversation, senior partners and junior analysts seated at long communal tables, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled. Daniel greeted Nolan with a quick handshake and a short tour. You'll be over here for now, he said, gesturing to a modest desk in the East Wing. You'll notice you don't have an assistant yet. We thought you might want to pick your own. He winked. Builder's privilege. Nolan smiled. Perfect. He got to work quietly. No splashy announcement, no self-congratulatory email blast. He scheduled one-on-one chats with every member of the team, analysts, advisors, even admin staff. He asked each the same 3 questions. What do we do well? What frustrates you? What would you fix if you had the power? He wrote everything down. Patterns emerged. The firm was strong, yes, but it leaned heavily on a handful of rainmakers. Processes were inconsistent. Training was minimal. Younger staff felt lost after onboarding. Clients didn't always know who to call when a partner was traveling. Nolan spent 2 weeks just listening. Then he called a Friday lunch meeting and presented his plan, a restructured client service model based on continuity and proactive contact. Each client would have a 3-person pod: advisor, support analyst, and relationship steward. Everyone trained to step up. No silos. No single points of failure. He built the mentorship program he wished he'd had. Weekly mock pitch sessions. Call debriefs. Client empathy workshops. One evening, as most of the office trickled out, Nolan sat in the corner reviewing notes. A junior associate named Leah Patel hovered near his desk. Mr. Reed? Got a sec? Sure, Leah. What's up? I wanted to say thanks. No one ever really asked me what I thought before. You wrote it down. Nolan closed his notebook. That's because what you think matters, he said. That's how we grow. She nodded, then disappeared down the hall. By the end of the quarter, client satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. 3 legacy clients from Nolan's Redmond days returned, unprompted. And the team? They weren't just performing. They were owning their growth. It wasn't about ego or recognition. It was about building something sustainable. Something that would last long after his name faded from the door. The tremors began subtly at Redmond and Pierce, but they didn't stay subtle for long. At first, it was just a few murmurs. A key client withdrawing funds here, another freezing a retainer there. Tyler Grayson called them temporary contractions in a company-wide email filled with buzzwords like market repositioning and client recalibration. But everyone on the inside knew what was happening. The ship was leaking. And the man who had held it steady for nearly a decade was gone. By the second month of Nolan's absence, the cracks had deepened. Keystone Freight terminated their advisory contract completely. Summit Ridge Capital sent a scathing email to the board outlining a catastrophic breach in continuity. Wynn and Tilling moved their entire account to Halston Row without so much as a backward glance. Newer associates were overwhelmed. Clients called in with questions about account transitions and got vague, inconsistent answers. Morale plummeted. Internal Slack channels, once lively with harmless memes and coffee bets, became silent. The silence of anxiety. And Crestview Holdings? The private equity firm that had once been circling Redmond with a $90 million acquisition deal? They ghosted. No follow-up meetings. No revised LOIs. Just radio silence. In week 11, Redmond's CEO announced his early retirement. 2 managing directors resigned within 10 days. Tyler Grayson was quietly removed from all client-facing responsibilities and reassigned to a vague strategic operations role that came with no team and no purpose. Meanwhile, Halston Row thrived. Not because they poached clients, but because clients came looking for the person they trusted. Nolan. He had become, unintentionally, a symbol. A counterexample to every overpromising, under-delivering financial executive with a 10-slide pitch deck and no idea how to talk to a nervous widow who just lost her husband and now had to make sense of 30 years of investments. At Halston Row, Nolan's team continued to grow, not just in size, but in confidence. Leah Patel co-led her first client pitch. 2 associates he mentored received glowing client referrals. Even Daniel, the managing partner, confessed one evening over beers, "You didn't just help us grow. You helped us become." Then came the call. A recruiter from one of the largest firms in the industry. The kind that made headlines with acquisitions and bonuses. She spoke politely, with polished charm. "Mr. Reed, we're prepared to make a significant offer. You'd have full leadership of the relationship division. Name your number." Nolan didn't hesitate. "Thank you," he said. "But I'm already where I'm supposed to be." She paused. "May I ask why?" "Because here," he said, "what we build doesn't collapse the moment someone leaves." 1 year to the day after he was escorted out of Redmond and Pierce with a cardboard box and his bonsai tree, Nolan stood backstage at the National Wealth Leadership Summit in Chicago. He wasn't there to pitch a new fund or unveil a market outlook report. He was there because people had heard the story. Not the headlines, there hadn't been any, but the real one. Of how a single advisor walked out of a firm, and half its heart walked out with him. The session was titled Human Capital, the Real ROI. Nolan chuckled when he first saw it. But standing behind the curtain, mic clipped to his lapel, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: calm. The moderator introduced him with a short bio: decades in client services, currently a partner at Halston Row, known for rebuilding a relationship-first culture in a metrics-obsessed industry. Nolan stepped onto the stage to light applause. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need slides. He carried memory. He began with a story. "Years ago, I took a client call while standing in the hallway of my daughter's school. It was parent-teacher night. My wife wasn't thrilled. But the market had dropped 11% that day, and the man on the phone was in tears. Not because of the money, but because it meant he might have to sell the company his father built. I stayed on the phone. We figured it out. That client still sends me holiday cards. The room was silent. I'm not proud of missing my daughter's class that night. But I'm proud that client knew I'd show up. And that's what trust really is. It's not in the handshake. It's in the 10th time you answer a call at 9 p.m. with no agenda other than, "I've got you." He spoke for 30 minutes. Not about quarterly targets, but about people. About building a culture that didn't fall apart when someone walked away. About mentoring with intention. About staying human in a business that rewards becoming a machine. When he stepped off stage, a standing ovation followed him into the hallway. That evening, at the hotel bar, a young woman in a navy blazer approached him, nervously tucking her badge into her coat. "Mr. Reed? I just wanted to say thank you. I started in this industry because I thought it was about helping people. Lately, it feels like I've just been chasing numbers. Today, you reminded me I wasn't wrong." Nolan smiled. "You're not. Just don't let them convince you otherwise." She smiled back and walked away. Nolan took a seat by the window. Ordered a bourbon, neat. Outside, the city glowed. Inside, he finally felt still. He thought back to that day a year ago. The elevator ride. The silence. The goodbye no one gave him. They thought they were ending something. They were wrong. He wasn't ending. He was just beginning.